16th, 2016. Okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so we've been discussing the sutta number 148 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called in Pali the Chachakka Sutta, which means the 6 sets of 6. And the theme of this discourse is the teaching of non-self anatta. And the way the Buddha, in this sutta, the way he approaches the teaching of non-self is by going through the 6 groups of factors involved in 6 stages in the process of sense perception leading up to craving. So we have 6 internal sense bases, or the 6 sense faculties. There are 6 objects, 6 types of consciousness, 6 types of contact, 6 types of feeling. Then based on the 6 types of feeling, 6 types of craving. So each is oriented to a particular sensory domain. Okay, then the Buddha, in the first part of the discourse, it's actually the second part of the discourse, he develops what I call a demonstration of non-self. No, we need the light. Yeah. Is that... Okay, so he develops what I call a demonstration of non-self. That is, it seems to be using logical reasoning in order to show or to prove or to expose the truth of non-self. And it's done as though he's working through a process of logical reasoning, even though the point of this is not logic, but it's a kind of exercise in contemplation, or let's say a kind of reflective investigation or examination to see why each of these bases or objects is, in fact, non-self. And so what's underlying the notion of self here, this is as I'm sort of reviewing what I covered last time, what underlies the notion of self is the notion of permanence or stability or persistence. So when the Buddha uses the word self in this philosophical context, he's using it sharing with the Indian systems of thought of that period the idea that the concept of self, the very idea of self, implies something which persists, which lasts, which endures. And in most Indian systems, the idea of self is connected with eternal existence, that which exists permanently. In other contexts, when the Buddha uses the word self, this is what I call the ethical or the spiritual context, then he uses the word self in a positive way or an affirmative way, that he speaks about the need to purify oneself, to take responsibility for oneself, to transform oneself, to liberate oneself. And it's using the same Pali word, or in Sanskrit, the same Sanskrit word, atta, or atman. But that's just a kind of concession to the ordinary, call it the everyday or conventional use of the word self. But when the Buddha's shifting over to the philosophical context, where the idea of self, or psychological context, where the idea of self is that which we cling to with the notion, this is what I really am, this is my true identity, then the Buddha tries to demonstrate the invalidity of that notion, or the non-ultimacy of that notion, that this philosophical idea of self does not correspond to anything in reality. When somebody tries to fill in the idea of self, we have this idea sort of arising in the mind, I am, or I have a self, and then one tries to figure out, what is myself? What is this self? Then one does so by taking one or another of the 5 aggregates and saying, this is myself. Or in this sutta, the Buddha doesn't use the 5 aggregate scheme, but he uses the scheme of the 6 sense bases, their objects, states of consciousness, and so on. So if there is to be a self, it has to exist in relation to the 6 sense bases, 6 types of consciousness, and so on. But now, this is where sort of the Buddha homes in on the problem. The idea of self is connected to the idea of permanence or persistence. And so if we identify anything as self, that thing identified as self has to be permanent, lasting, persistent. But when one identifies anything with self, what one identifies is the 6 sense bases, 6 types of consciousness, anything in the 6 types, 6 groups of 6. And when we look into any of those things identified as self, we see that it is subject to arising and passing away, coming into existence, going out of existence. Okay, so here we just take paragraph 10 as sort of a paradigm for this type of argument. So if somebody says that the I is self, that isn't valid, not acceptable. The reason it's not acceptable is because the rise and fall of the I are discerned. The I is seen arising and passing away. Okay, and so if somebody says that the I is self, then it would follow that myself arises and passes away. And therefore it follows that it's not acceptable to say the I is self. Okay, then the same applies to everything else in these 6 groups of 6. I think that's as far as I got last time, is that correct? It's a rhetorical question. Okay, does anybody have any questions on this before we go further? And questions directly relevant to the topic? Okay, you speak loudly, Ravi.
Spaces. The 6 internal, 6 external, whatever. Aren't the internal bases part of the Panchaskandha, which is a...
Yeah, it's just that the Buddha isn't using the Panchakhanda in this sutta at this point.
Yeah, because most of us, when we refer to ourselves, we refer to the body and everything else, which is part of Panchaskandha. Not completely in the sense basis as such. Sense bases are related.
Yeah, but this sutta is using the sense bases as the theme.
Yeah, thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so shall we continue on to the next part of the sutta? Okay, so now we come to a section which is titled The Origination of Identity. Okay, and this begins, now, bhikkhus, this is the way leading to the origination of identity. And this is a difficult word to translate into English. I mean, the Pali word is difficult. Identity, it's not really satisfactory. But let's see what the Pali word is. Yeah, the Pali word is Sakkaya, which is a compound of the word sat, which means existing, real, present, plus kaya, which normally means body. Now I notice the Chinese translators sometimes often use shan for sakkaya, which is somewhat misleading because then it gives the impression that it's just the physical body that's intended. But sakkaya is the combination of the 5 aggregates. So the word kaya here doesn't have the narrow denotation of the physical body, but kaya is used in the sense of a collection. And so this is the collection of things that are actually existing that make up one's, or a collection of the things that constitute one's actual existence. And what are these things that make up sakkaya, personal identity? These are the 5 aggregates. Okay, and so now the Buddha is going to explain here the origination of identity. And he does this, again, he's using here the sense bases as the sort of theme of exposition. So he says, one regards the I thus, this is mine, this I am, this is myself. One regards forms, eye consciousness, eye contact, feeling, craving thus, this is mine, this I am, this is myself. Okay, within the statement about regarding things, the way one regards things, we have 3 terms And the commentary connects these three terms with three different mental afflictions or defilements. Okay, so mine, the idea this is mine, that is a kind of expression of which mental defilement? What do you think? I think Sandy got it. Say it loudly. Right. So the reason one takes things to be mine is because of craving. So I see in a shop a pair of very stylish, polarized sunglasses, and I think I want to be stylish. And so I want to make them mine. And so then I buy them and I can wear them and be very stylish. Okay, so this is a kind of reflection of craving. Then this I am is a reflection of which defilement? Exactly, right. This is mana, the conceit. Particularly the conceit, I am. And so one thinks, usually the texts speak about three modes of conceit. So that when we hear the word conceit, we always think that to have conceit means that you imagine yourself to be better than others. But according to the Buddhist text, there are actually three modes of conceit. So the grossest is the conceit, I am better. Taking oneself to be, superior to others. But then there's also the conceit, it's called sadiso hamasmi, the conceit, I am just as good as they are. When you're feeling down as a little kid, little boy or little girl, your mother says, you're just as good as they are. Okay, so then you feel that confidence, I'm just as good as they are, so that's the conceit. We call this the similarity conceit. And then the third type of conceit is the conceit, I am inferior. So everybody looks so beautiful, but I am so ugly. Everybody's so smart, oh, I'm so stupid. Everybody else is such a great meditator, but I always have these distracting and disturbing thoughts. Everybody else has so healthy, I have all of these health problems. I'm weighed down by my karma. So all of this sort of depressed, melancholy way of thinking about oneself is also an expression of conceit. Okay, then the third idea that arises here, this is myself, is an expression or manifestation of what particular mental affliction? This is a little tricky. Okay, this is a reflection of views. And so, actually it seems to me that there's a very close similarity between this I am and this is myself. So the question might come up like, what is the difference between them? And they do, as I said, they seem very similar, but the way I try to describe the difference between them, I would say that the notion, this I am, sort of centers around the idea of I am. So this is a more we'll call it maybe a more spontaneous idea, less philosophical idea, less reflective idea. So it's just the idea I am arises, and then one starts rating oneself by comparing oneself with others and then rating oneself where one stands on the spectrum of superiority, inferiority in relation to others. But the idea that this is myself, this is where one takes the idea of self and starts filling in the content. Am I my body? Is that myself? Is the mind the self? Is the self something distinct from body and mind? Some kind of eternal spirit hiding in the background or way up above, manifesting through the body and mind. So all of these speculative ideas that revolve around the self, these all come under the category of views. And now the Buddha, or the text, describes this as the origination of Sakkaya, the origination of personal identity. And this could be understood actually in two ways. One, I would say, is the way which is directly visible here and now, in that it's through grasping upon any of these objects, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and so forth, that one creates a sense of one's personal identity right here and now. So one's sense of identity is constructed by grasping upon things as mine, building upon them the idea I am, and then by fashioning and constructing views about the relation of oneself to these things that one is grasping. So this is looking at the origination of personal identity from what I would call a direct, immediately visible, this life perspective. But there's another perspective to this, which is the relationship between these ideas of mine, I, and myself and the construction of personal identity from one life into future lives. And so from this perspective, it's the grasping of things as mine, I, and myself that functions as the cause for bringing into being a collection or an assemblage of the five aggregates in the following life. So because in this life I am grasping, let's use the five aggregates, it's easier than the six sixes. Okay, I don't have to go through 36 items. Okay, because I'm grasping bodily form, feeling, perceptions, mental activities, and consciousness, and thinking, this is mine, this I am, this is myself. So that grasping is attached to these five aggregates, here and now. And the stream of consciousness is carrying along that grasping. And so as long as the stream of consciousness is flowing along based on this physical body, then I'm constantly grasping one or another of the five aggregates with the idea, this is mine, this I am, this is myself. Okay, now the body falls away at death, can no longer support the stream of consciousness. But within that stream of consciousness, there is still that tendency to grasp at mine, to grasp after something as I am, to grasp after something as myself. But the life has come to an end. And so what happens? Okay, this is Johnny while alive. He's constantly grasping at the five aggregates as mine, I, myself. I shouldn't have used the word. Okay, this is Jimmy. Or Lenny, we'll call it Lenny. Okay, this is Lenny in his coffin. Okay. Body can't support anything. It can't support the stream of consciousness anymore. But when he dies, there's still that grasping. So what happens? That grasping after mine, I, and self brings into being a new set of the five aggregates, which come together, come into being on the occasion of conception in the new life, and then as the embryo evolves and develops and comes out at the occasion of birth, then it becomes the new person, the new being. And so then this new being will inherit no longer Lenny. Let's say he's reborn in India, so we'll give him the name Rajiv. Okay, but the stream of consciousness passes over from Lenny into Rajiv. The karmic tendencies are still there, the character dispositions, and that grasping of mine, I, and self. And so that will continue, now based upon a new physical organism, a new set of the 5 aggregates. Okay, so that is the origination of identity. And here the sutta just develops it for all of these 6 sixes. So we don't have to go into the full exposition. Just when you see how it works for one, then it works in the same way for all. Okay, now we come to what's called the cessation of identity, the cessation of personal identity. And here the text says, one regards the I thus, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. And this is the way one contemplates the 6 sense bases or the 5 aggregates when doing the vipassana or insight meditation. So first, usually in the process of developing insight, one begins with the characteristic which is most apparent, the characteristic of impermanence, arising and passing away. Then whatever arises and passes away, one sees to be inherently insecure, unreliable, and therefore bound up with suffering, so it's dukkha. And then whatever is impermanent and bound up with dukkha is not to be taken as oneself, is non-self. And so then one moves into contemplating the 6 sense bases or the 5 aggregates. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. So this is the theme of contemplation in vipassana or insight meditation. And even though we are contemplating not mine, not I, not myself, as long as we are still ordinary people or worldlings, putujanas, we don't really know this to be truth. You know, we just accept it on trust from the Buddha, from the text, and we use it as our module or template for contemplation. But when there takes place the breakthrough to the truth of the Dhamma, that is what occurs with the attainment of stream entry, then one sees directly, clearly, indubitably the truth of non-self, that the very idea of self is seen to be a delusion or a fabrication. And so that idea of self falls away. And so the stream enterer and those at the higher stages can see directly and with knowledge, not just with trust or confidence, but they see with knowledge this, the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. Okay, but for the stream enterer, even for the stream enterer, even for the once returner, even for the non-returner, though they've seen this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. They've gotten rid of the idea of self, but there's still a subtle grasping to the idea of mine and the idea I am. I think it was last class I referred to this sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Khemaka Sutta, where the monk Khemaka is explaining how this is the Indian method, the old traditional Indian method of washing clothes. They take the clothes, which are dirty and grimy and sweaty, and then they put it in a bucket of water they use cow dung, or anybody know what they use in nature? Lye? Would lye damage the clothes? Oh, I think it might be lime. Lime, not the fruit.
Well, lye is an ingredient in making soap.
Oh, yeah, then maybe they use lye also. Okay, let's just say the cow dung is what they use, okay. Yeah, no, they use it. That's what they use. So they use it in order to get rid of all of the dirt, sweat, grime, stains, and so on. And then you clear out the water, and the clothes are now clean, but they still have the odor of the cow dung. It's a pleasant odor, because it's just digested grass, that's all. But then what they do is to take the clothes and put them in a casket with ground up sandalwood powder, or jasmine, flowers, or other types of nice fragrances. And then, after some time, then they take the clothes out from the casket, and the clothes have a very nice smell. And so, at the stage of the stream enterer, this is like clearing out the dirt and grime of the clothes with the cow dung. So he's gotten rid of the idea of self and accepting the reality of mine and I, but still some kind of odor of I and mine, a subtle tendency to I and mine still remains within his mind. Okay, but then he develops the insight further until he reaches the fourth and final stage of realization. This is the stage of arahatship. And at that point, all grasping after mine and I are purged completely. Okay, so when we speak about the cessation of identity, again, we could look at it from the similar two perspectives. First, from the immediately visible, this life perspective, that by contemplating this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself, one is deconstructing one's sense of personal identity. So one is looking at one's five aggregates, but one is removing from them that grasping to them as mine and I, which manifests in many ways as pride, jealousy, envy, self-importance, ambition. Okay, so just by contemplating, even with insight, or even just by reflection, this is not mine, this is I am not, this is not myself. It helps to remove those, we call these the negative subjective tendencies. And it's very useful even to do this as a reflection. To give an example from my own experience, going way back many years ago when I had to give my first Dharma talks, I was very, very frightened. That I'm going to make mistakes, everybody will be looking at me very critically, laughing at me, asking me difficult questions that I can't answer, or just the worst fear, just sitting there, maybe drawing little pictures in their notebooks. Or, and the Buddha made the most astounding discovery. So what do I do if they're all sound asleep? Okay, but then I use this reflection, not mine, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. And it was very helpful. So when everybody fell asleep, I didn't take it personally. And when somebody asked me a difficult question, I didn't get too angry with him. Okay, so this, I lost track. Okay. Okay, so this is the useful contemplation in deconstructing the sense of identity that you could use. You don't have to be a great meditator with high stages of insight. But even if you just do this as a reflection, when you're doing your regular meditation, just go through the 5 aggregates, reflecting for bodily form, not mine, not I, not myself. Feeling, not mine, not I, not myself. Perception, volitional activities, consciousness, each one not mine, not I, not myself. Here there is nothing that's mine, nothing, no real I, nothing to be taken as myself. And then you'll see that over time, not just at one session, not just 1 or 2 sessions, over time it helps to improve patience, humility, kindness towards others, consideration of others. And it's moving in the direction, it sort of trains the mind in the direction of wisdom. Okay, then when there takes place the breakthrough to the attainment of the lower stages of realization, then one is in the process of deconstructing the sense of identity. And then with the realization of arhatship, then the sense of identity is completely eliminated. And so the arhat in this life has no idea, or let's say no grasping after the ideas of mine, I, or self. So that is the deconstruction of personal identity that's possible in this life itself, to be realized in this life itself. And then, looking at it from the multi-life perspective, the realization of not mine, not I, not myself, brings an end to this process, repeated process. Yeah, this time he's been reborn as a dog, yeah. Okay, he can't do that contemplation as a dog. Let's give him a next human life. Okay, so he has a lot of merits. And so now he contemplates not mine, not I, not myself. He reaches arhatship, then passing away. No more rebirth, nibbana. What? Okay, at this point now I'll ask whether there's any questions. Okay. Wait, please take the microphone.
Oh, yes, Bhante. What happens to the stream of consciousness when an arhat reaches nibbana?
Oh, I didn't want to get into that topic. I'll punt on that question for now, because I think I've dealt with it in previous classes, and it's pretty difficult to answer.
Okay.
Let us say, I'll put it very simply. The way I understand it, the stream of consciousness becomes nibbanized. That is, it goes outside the sphere of space, time, causation, and it becomes unconditioned. It's not that consciousness becomes unconditioned, but consciousness gives way, because consciousness is always conditioned, arising and passing away. But the stream of consciousness, you could say, gives way to the unconditioned, the ultimate element, nibbana.
Thank you.
Okay, Barbara?
I find that this I, me, the self, I, me, mine, that persists from Jimmy to Ravi, is the one place in the Dhamma where I have to just take it on faith. I don't see any, I can't see any evidence that occurs.
I see. You mean that...
So how did the Buddha come up with, how is it that we have it, and can it be explained so that I can get a sense of
I'm not quite sure that you don't...
I can't believe yet that persists into a new life.
You mean that the stream of consciousness moves on to a new life?
Yes.
Okay, I think I've dealt with this before also. As far as hard, concrete evidence goes, unless one has the ability to recollect previous lives, and I make no claim to have that ability myself, there's no direct evidence. The Buddha's texts, of course, in the Buddha's text, the Buddha again and again speaks about rebirth. He speaks about that he himself recollects his previous lives, that he sees other beings arising and passing away. And then he says that others can develop this ability. It's not like it's a knowledge unique to himself. To gain that knowledge depends on first mastering the 4 jhanas, which make the mind very, very tranquil, and then using that powerful, concentrated mind to go back in time until it brings up recollections of previous lives. Of course, one could say, okay, the mind is capable of almost anything. So you could say that, okay, you get what you think are recollections of previous lives. These are just, very subtle fantasies that the mind is creating, just like in a dream. Now, I don't know how to refute a claim like that. But let me just say that there's been research done by a few